Hello, welcome. Come on in. We're going to give everybody just a minute or two to come in and get settled before we start with all the juicy bits. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat along with the organization you're affiliated with and excuse me, your land acknowledgement. And we will get started in just 1 second. If you do have any questions and they're already burning in your mind, all questions will go into the Q&A function instead of the chat function. If you can please do that. So I know we're expecting about 40 people. So we're at 28. I'm going to give it just another minute. Amanda, you can go ahead and start the slideshow. You all made such a beautiful slideshow, we may as well show it. Okay. Let me get all set. All right. We have a lot of stuff to cover, so let's go ahead and jump in. Go ahead and we'll go to the next slide. All right, so as I mentioned, come on in, introduce yourself in the chat so that you know right off the bat, even before I introduce myself, this is being recorded. You will get a link to the recording, you'll get a link to the slides, and Martha will put a handy list of links in the chat so you can listen and don't feel like you have to write absolutely everything down because you will get all the resources afterwards. All right, so let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Terry Ball, and I am the Senior Programs Manager here at Californians for the Arts. I am joined today by some more of our Performing Arts Equitable Payroll Fund team, Beatrice Casagran and Martha Dimson, who are part of our team, are both here. Martha will be manning the chat, putting some links in there. If you put questions into the chat, Martha will remind you to move them over to the Q&A. And Beatrice is running our Q&A today. So she will be, as we move through, she will answer the questions in the Q&A. We also will stop periodically to go over the questions that have come up for specific parts of the webinar. If something really big comes up in the Q&A or if I misspeak, Beatrice will also stop us, and so we can deal with something immediately in the moment. And then we will save some time at the very end for additional catch-up Q&A. All right, so, oh, and also Amanda Sanchez from our team is here manning all things slides. It takes a village. Yes.
I want to make sure it's being recorded. I'm not showing that on my computer.
It is showing on mine.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Thank you. No, that's okay. Thank you for double checking, because that would be very bad. And we can avoid the panic you and I had at the end of the webinar yesterday. Now, I have the infamous little red button and it says recording.
Perfect. Okay, great.
So we are good to go. And let's jump to the next slide. Okay, so we are here from Californians for the Arts. We'll go over this in more detail, but this is the Performing Arts Equitable Payroll Fund is a program of the state administered by Cal OSBA, which is the California Office of the Small Business Advocate, and then CFTA, Californians for the Arts, is managing the program. These are state funds that are being administered. This is not a Californian for the Arts grant program. So it's very important to all of us that we understand that. I'm not sure if any of our friends from Cal OSBA are here today, but if they are, welcome. We are very excited to be partnering with Cal OSBA on this program. All right. California Arts Advocates and Californians for the Arts are our two organizations. They are two separate nonprofits. Californians for the Arts is the statewide arts advocacy service organization, and California Arts Advocates is the comprehensive lobbying organization. So CFTA does a lot of education and programming and building grassroots advocacy. And then CAA is here to do the actual lobbying that as a nonprofit, we all know we have to balance between those, what we can and cannot do. All right, next. Okay, so as I mentioned, it's really important to us that you put your questions into the Q&A and not into the chat. This is for a couple of different reasons. One, we want you to know that you can answer all along. It's much easier if you put it into the Q&A because then we can answer them directly and you don't have to worry about information flying by. Secondly, we produce a transcript of the Q&A afterwards and share that with you, and those will also ultimately be available on the website. So your questions can benefit everyone else. And if those are all in the Q&A, they all go into the transcript. If questions are in the chat, it's much more difficult for us to manage answering both places. So if you do forget and put something in the chat, because we don't want to reward bad behavior, we won't answer it in the chat. We will just ask you to please move it over to the Q&A. It is one of those odd vagaries of Zoom that we can't move it for you. The Zoom lords are somewhat guiding. But so you may get a reminder to please move something over to the Q&A. Next. There's a few tips here about operating in Zoom to hopefully make things a little easier. I believe Martha has also put these tips into the chat, and they are in the document, the links document that she should have put into the chat. So this is just telling you, showing you how you can get the closed captioning option down at the bottom of the screen. Next. There's also some tips here on how to move things around on your screen. As you probably know, the view that you set up is your personal view. So whatever works best for you in terms of where you want the chat, where you want the Q&A, you are welcome to fix that for yourself. And here's some tips on doing that. Next. Okay. This is a group effort to publicize and do the outreach for this program. And we are partnering with some wonderful organizations across the state. These are the organizations who are co-hosting the webinars with us. They also have the resources, and they are helping us expand the audience. There is a whole series of webinars that we'll review, and you are welcome to attend any webinar. Because the webinars themselves have all of the same content, but we are partnering with lots of different organizations, knowing that they have different audiences and different constituencies. So we get as wide a breadth as possible, because it is extremely important to us that everyone in the state who is potentially eligible for this program knows about the program and is able to apply for the program. This is important to us for two reasons. One is, of course, we want everyone who possibly can to get the funds, because we know how desperately these funds are needed. But also, this is currently a program that only has funding for 1 year. And the more people that apply, that is the first step in our advocacy towards getting ongoing funding. So one of the things that we ask you to do is not only get yourself ready, but any other organizations in your circle, any of your colleagues, friends, friendly enemies that you think might be eligible for the program, please send the information to them, to direct them to the website, so they know too, because not only are you helping them, but you're helping yourself, because it will help us as we try to get ongoing funding for the program. All right, speaking of community partners, our community partner for today, first, I'm sorry, thank you, the webinar schedule. There is the schedule for the rest of the webinars. We've also just added one for February 25th that will be up on the website soon. That is going to be simultaneously translated into Spanish. So if you have any colleagues that need the Spanish language translation, you can tell them that that will be coming on February 25th, and then that recording will be up as well. Okay, next. So our partners for today are the Stanislaus Arts Council, and particularly Dominique Johnson. And I would like to now introduce Dominique to introduce herself and the Stanislaus Arts Council.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dominique. I'm with the Stanislaus Arts Council. As Terry had said, I thank you all so much for coming today. And we're very excited about this program and supporting you all as you get through it. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for helping us spread the word. Okay, next. Advocacy works, and that's the only reason we're here today. So I just want to take a moment to celebrate the victory that this was. As many of you know, because you were part of the long work, it took multiple years of a whole lot of work and advocacy and emails and visits to legislators to get this program passed into law, to then get the program funded in the budget, and last May to protect those funds that were almost taken away in the budget revisions. So thank you for your work. Congratulations on the success. And we hope you are ready, in addition to applying, to help us to advocate so that we can get more funds and make this an ongoing program. But if you ever wonder, advocacy does in fact work, and that's the only reason we're here. All right, next. So what is this program that we're all here for today? The Performing Arts Equitable Payroll Fund was created to support small nonprofit performing arts organizations, those with revenues under $2 million, in hiring and retaining employees. The fund reimburses a portion of payroll costs on a quarterly basis. The program's goal is to restore resilience and build sustainability in the sector through an investment in creative jobs, and it is administered by the office, the California Office of the Small Business Advocate, or Cal OSBA, and managed by Californians for the Arts. The first juicy detail: the application portal will open on March 10th, 2025 at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Someone reminded me today we should be saying. Applications will be reviewed in the order they are received. So there is reason to get yourself together and get your application in as soon as possible. All right, next. So we're going to go over the details of this program. First of all, you can apply both 501c3 performing arts organizations who can apply, and also Model C fiscally sponsored organizations. Different fiscal sponsor relationships have different descriptions, and it is specifically a Model C agreement that is required to apply for this. So if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, check with your fiscal sponsor. You do have to have an actual fiscal sponsor agreement, a written agreement between you and the fiscal sponsor to be able to apply. The other thing to remember, if you are a fiscal sponsor, if you as the fiscal sponsor meet the eligibility requirements, you can apply for your organization, and then you can apply separately for up to 10 fiscally sponsored organizations. It's 2 different applications, so that is a separate process. All right, next. This grant is set up to be evaluated on some very specific eligibility criteria. This and it is very much just based on those criteria. There is not a narrative portion to this. There are not evaluations that are made about the art, that we're not pitting one organization against the other. You yourself are either eligible or you are not. Those eligibility criteria, and we will discuss all of these in more detail, but I want to give you an overview. First, that you are either a 501c3 nonprofit or a Model C fiscally sponsored organization, that you are producing, presenting, performing arts that are open to the public, that the events themselves can be free. They do not have to be ticketed. They do have to be open to the public, and the performers do have to be paid. That you are hiring and paying your workers as employees. That is critical. The funds for this are all reimbursements, and the only expenses that are available are those that are tied to employees. And these are 501, no, I'm sorry. These are W-2 employees, so no independent contractors or contractors. You have to be in compliance with the California sexual harassment training requirements. This is an area that has caused a lot of people some confusion. There is a link here that is also in the document and in the program guidelines that you'll get a copy of, to where you can go to the state and look up what those sexual harassment training requirements are. There's some variability based on your organization size. There are different criteria for permanent and seasonal employees. So instead of confusing people by going into those details here, we're going to give you the link so you can go and look at what is required for your employees in your organization. And then in the course of the application, you will be asked to certify that you are in fact in compliance. You are not going to be asked to upload each individual employee's certificate from their training. And there is no specific certificate that you download to say, yes, we're in compliance. You just need to look and determine that your organization is in fact in compliance. And you don't have to have been in compliance 2 years ago. What you have to do is when you submit your application, you need to be able to say at that point that you are in compliance. Okay, you have to have a written DEI policy and a written anti-harassment policy in place that have been approved by your board. If these are part of an employee handbook that has been approved and in use, that is totally fine. You will be asked to upload a copy of each, including the date when these were approved and when they were last updated. You are not going to be evaluated on when these went into place. You will not be evaluated on the content of them. You will be evaluated on the fact that you have one and that you have uploaded it. I know that there is a lot of federal conversation, concern about DEI policies right now. This requirement is written into the statute of the program. The only way to change this requirement at this point would be to go back and change the statute, which would stop everything on the program. At this point, there is no plan to do that. So not unlike other state funding programs, you will be required to upload a DEI policy to apply for the program. You have to have a mission statement. You have to be certified as in good standing by the California Secretary of State. The link here is to the Secretary of State's website, where you can go and search your business and see if you are in fact in good standing. And then there's a way there to download a certificate. And that certificate is what you will actually upload as part of the application. And we have instructions later on where you find that and how you do that. This is also where you can look up your statement of information, which is a good idea. And we'll talk about that when we're talking about your authorized signers. You have to be able to provide 990s for the last 3 filed years. So not just the last 3 calendar years, but the last 3 years that you were required to file. And that needs to be 3 of the last 5 years. So if you have filed an extension, for example, and so you haven't yet filed 23, but that's okay. You just have to have 3 filed years within the last 5 years. For those of you who file a 990N for small organizations, you will instead provide the form CTTR1, which is a state form. And the reason is the 990N postcard doesn't actually include financial details. And so this other form will give us the financial details. As we go through it, the fiscal sponsors, there will be one set of requirements for fiscal sponsors and one set of requirements for the fiscally sponsored. Okay, and then you have to have adjusted average annual revenue under $2 million. We're going to talk about how that's calculated, but it's an average over the last 3 years, those 3 filed years, and we'll talk about the adjustments that go into that. And finally, you have to not fall under any of the list of ineligible organization types. So next, and we'll go over those. All right, the point of this program is to support organizations in paying their performers and their other employees. And so some organizations where the primary focus is not performances with professional performers are not eligible. Unfortunately, anytime you're starting a new program, we can't get something that encompasses everyone frequently through the state. And that's why some organizations, types of organizations, were not eligible for this program. The areas that cause the most confusion for people is the talk about the youth performances, keeping in mind that this is about the people who are performing, not the content of the performance. So if you have a production company that does performances that are geared towards children, but the performers themselves and the workers are paid adults, then you're fine. If you have a company that your main focus, we're going to talk a lot about the primary mission, the primary focus of your organization. So if your primary focus is producing performances available to the public with adult paid performers, but you also have a side small, as part of your programming, you do youth classes. That's fine, as long as the youth classes are part of your program. They are not the primary focus of your program. I'm based here in Santa Barbara, and I've been using some local organizations. We have a local theater called Ensemble Theater Company, which is an equity professional company, and they have a youth program in the summer. So they would be eligible because their primary focus is their main performances, not their youth programming. And because what we're reimbursing for in this case is your employees. If your organization as a whole is eligible, then your employees, including those that work on that youth performance, are eligible. In contrast, we also have in town a wonderful company called Festival Ballet, whose primary focus is training young dancers. They do a couple of performances during the year, but that's a performance opportunity for their students. That's not their main focus. So Festival Ballet, unfortunately, would not be eligible for the program. All right.
Terry?
Yes.
An interesting permutation of this question has come up. So if a company hires all professional actors and staff, and they have some traditionally public performances, but most of their performances are at schools, is that considered public?
That's an interesting question.
That's what I said. So I asked to submit an email, but I just thought that was an interesting question. Yeah.
Jocelyn, if you can put what you're going to say into the Q&A, that would be really helpful. Instead of doing the raised hand. Yeah, I think that we should take that one and get a determination, because
Right.
I know there is the question about, advertised. And so I think we need to look into this one. One of the things that we all have to remember is this is a brand new program. It's the first time it's being executed, and it's really the first time it's a brand new program, not just in the state, but anywhere. And so some of this we are figuring out, and because we are managing the program and not the final arbiters, one of the things that we all learn in advocacy is there's the intention that you have as you're advocating for a bill. Then there's what actually makes it into the bill and passes. And then the real reality comes when the lawyers get involved and tell you what in the legal interpretation of the state, those rules actually mean. So this is one where we're going to go and get clarification because I don't want to give anybody bad information. Okay, so next, thank you, Beatrice. All right, so now we're going to hit some of the nitty gritty. The way that the payments for this grant work are, it is a reimbursement of your payroll expenses. And those reimbursements happen on a tiered basis. The idea was that the smallest organizations receive the largest percentage of reimbursements. So those organizations whose adjusted gross revenue is under $250,000 receive 80% of their eligible payroll expenses, down to organizations that are between 1.75 million and 2 million receive 20% reimbursement of their eligible expenses. So the first step is to determine what is your adjusted gross revenue over the course of the 3 years from your filed 990s. And because we realize, or those who wrote the statute, realize that there is income that happens sometimes for people that throws off your annual revenue and makes it look like you actually have more money than your actual operating expenses. For example, if you get a big capital restricted grant, or if you have pass-through funds that are collected for another organization, like, for example, if you work with fiscal sponsors, if you are a fiscal sponsor. And finally, the one that is the most confusing is this reference to funds received pursuant to section 8753.6, which actually refers to special funds under the California Arts Council. This is not the public grant programs that are administered by the California Arts Council. So if you applied and got a operating grant or a youth in schools grant through the California Arts Council, that's not what we're talking about here. There are a couple of special funds, the Arts in Schools Fund and the Arts License Plate Fund. If you get funds through those specific programs, then that is money that can be excluded from your annual gross revenue. And there will be a form in the application that will ask you these questions. It's going to ask for each of the 3 years for which you have provided your 990 or other paperwork, for your gross revenue, and that's total revenue, for your, if you do have any capital expenditures, donor designated, and if you have any pass-through funds, or if you have these funds, these special CAC funds. You're going to enter those into the form, and then the form is going to do the calculations for you. It's going to add up the annual, and then it's going to average it out, and it's going to tell you what your 3-year adjusted gross revenue is. And then you can look back to the chart, see what your tier is, and then you will know when it comes to processing, looking at the payroll expenses, what your level of reimbursement is. If you do have some of these funds that you want excluded to try to bring down your annual revenue, you will have to provide documentation to establish those. So for the capital expenditures, you might have the donor letter or a copy of the grant agreement. Okay, so let's move on to the next. What can be reimbursed? Employee wages, and those are gross wages. And again, these are just employees. These are not independent contractors. Workers' comp expenses, your premium that you pay each year for workers' comp, that can be reimbursed. Payments that the employer makes towards pension, retirement, health plans, those can be reimbursed. And payroll and paymaster paycheck processing fees. If you pay extra to be able to process your payroll through QuickBooks, then you could get reimbursed, not for your QuickBooks, but for that extra amount you pay to do your payroll through QuickBooks or Gusto or Paychecks, your paymaster, if you're part of CalPayArt, those fees. All of these things are calculated on a per employee basis, and you are eligible for reimbursement for up to $10,000 per employee per quarter, and then your reimbursement comes in. So if, for example, then that tier percentage comes in. So for example, if you are an organization with an adjusted gross revenue under 250,000 and your reimbursement is 80%, then you would be eligible per employee for 80% of $10,000 per employee per quarter. And employee wages are what is listed on your payroll records and on their check as gross wages. This is not reimbursements. This is their gross wages. If you reimburse them for cell phones, if you reimburse them for travel or something like that, those are not reimbursable. It's also important to remember that this is a reimbursement. So you can't apply for a grant now and get money to start hiring employees. These have to be for employees that you are already employing. Let's use that word as many times as we can. We'll cover this in more detail, but the grant itself, yes.
I'm sorry. We are still getting some questions about what doesn't qualify in terms of youth and choirs. It's not that choirs do not qualify, but if you have a community choir where basically everybody performing is a volunteer, then that would fall under that community choir definition. Or if you have a kids theater where all the everybody on stage is an unpaid child performer, and you know, they're basically students who are being given recitals kind of thing, that also would not be eligible. I just want to, we keep getting this question today.
Yeah.
It seems to be strong amongst our group.
Totally understandable and much better to ask.
Yes.
We don't want you to go to a lot of work when
I'm bringing it up in case I'm missing something and you think that yeah.
No. I think you're absolutely correct. I know it's a little confusing. And I know particularly anything with the arts, you know, and funding, youth is one of the places that we usually go first. This particular fund was trying to correct some different challenges. It's not that youth performing arts isn't important and that everyone doesn't value them. It was this, there are specific challenges that those that hire employees are facing over the last few years as employees are being paid more and the state laws are changing around how they are treated. And this particular program was trying to address those specific challenges. Okay, so the grant itself covers a year. So 4 quarters are what will be eligible. 2 of those quarters are retroactive and 2 are going forward. So it's Q3 of 2024, Q4 of 2024, and Q1 of 2025 and Q2 of 2025. So as we're talking about these quarters, those are what we're referring to. Well, again, I can't figure out the perfect order to go over this information. But anyway, now you can go on to the next slide, Amanda. So this is just a rough timeline. Application portal will open on March 10th. Your application will be submitted. Along with your application, you're going to be submitting your payroll documentation for those first 2 quarters that we talked about, Q3 and Q4. Californians for the Arts team will review the documents and make sure everything is in order, and make recommendations for the state as to eligibility. If there are issues with your application, things like you've uploaded a wrong document, you've uploaded a document that we can't read, there's a question about one of your answers, we will contact you back, see if that can be corrected before it is passed on. As I said, the applications are reviewed on a first come, first served basis. So it behooves you to make sure that your documents are all clear and legible, that you try to get everything correct when you first apply, because if we have to contact you to say, you know, the PDF of your tax determination letter we couldn't read, then that's going to slow you down and you'll lose your, you know, you'll go back in your place in line, versus if everything is all correct from the very beginning. Okay, so once everything it goes through the CFTA check, then it will go on to the state for final approval, and either you will get a notification from us letting you know that you were not eligible and why not, or good news that you were eligible and you will get a grant agreement to sign and return. And then, because this is a state agency and nothing at the state level moves quickly, from when that grant agreement is returned, you will have 45 to 90 days before the state issues your reimbursement for those first Q3 and Q4 payroll expenses. Then approved grantees following the end of Q1 of 2025, there will be a deadline and you will submit now your documentation and actual payroll for Q1 of 2025. As part of the application, you're going to submit projected numbers, but after the end of the quarter, you will submit your actual numbers and your documentation. Then again, once everything is done and approved, it will take 45 to 90 days for you to get that next set of reimbursements. And then the process will happen again after the end of Q2 of 2025. Then at the very end of the process in September, there will be a final report that is due, which is going to be about your employment numbers and some demographic data. So Beatrice, I forgot to stop before timeline to see if they have any questions on all that money stuff.
We've been answering them. If you've had an employee in Q3 or Q4 that is no longer an employee, and you were an eligible organization, you can still submit to be reimbursed for the wages that you paid for that employee. If you are going to have an employee but they start in April, for example, of next year, well, then you would be submitting an estimate for them, right? In Q2 of next year. You won't have them for Q1, obviously. So these things are all possible. Folks, if you're asking very specific questions about your own organizations, there's no hard, fast answers as to eligibility in terms of if you have some professional folks and then some community folks. I'm not going to be able to determine that for you. In fact, I'm not sure that we can determine it in an email. You may just have to apply, but we can look at more of the details if you email us and try to help you. So please just be aware. There's only so much we can do here in the webinar. If you have very specific situation, go ahead and email us so we can talk to you some more.
And just to follow up on what Beatrice is saying there, until we have your full package of information, we can't say, yes, you'll be eligible. Now, there are certain things that you could tell us that we will say to you, no, we don't think you would be eligible. but it's very difficult for us until we have all of, because there's a number of variables. Until we have all of your stuff, we can't guarantee you, yes, you will be eligible. Like I said, we can probably give you the negative and say, no, you know, you're a barber shop, you're not eligible. But and as Beatrice said, if you've got a detailed thing, there are other avenues where we can do that through email and office hours. Okay. Are you ready for me to move on? Or are you good?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next slide. This is really just a breakdown of the process we just talked through. The other important thing to remember about the quarters that we're talking about is that these are calendar year quarters. It does not matter if you are in a different fiscal year. The quarters stay the same. The other thing to know is, as we mentioned before, at this point, there is no funding for this program beyond this initial 1-year cycle. All right, let's move forward. Okay, the actual application process. The applications are being processed through a grant manager called GoSmart. We can go on to the next page. You will go in and you will set up an account. GoSmart is a portal used by others. If you have applied for funding before through another organization's GoSmart portal, you need to set up a unique account for this particular program. They have a really great tips page. This is all active now. The application is not up yet, but the portal is. You can go in now, you can go to the tips page and learn about using the portal. You can set up your particular account. Now you do not have to wait until March 10th to do those things. Once you have set up your account, when you do go back on March 10th, there will be 2 separate applications that you'll look for, one for 501c3s, one for the fiscally sponsored. The other thing to know is you don't need to complete the entire application in one session. If you need to stop and save and come back, you can do that. You also can jump around in the application. There's a navigation bar on the side. And if there's some juicy part that you're very excited, you can move and you don't have to do it in order. Okay, next. All right, this is some information about setting up your account. The information that you put into your account will roll into your application. So there is some of this that you want to prepare beforehand. You're going to log in. You're going to set up an organization account. This application, this grant opportunity is only available for organizations. So do not set up an individual one or you won't be able to apply. The person that you use as the contact for this should be your primary contact. As the case with many grants, there's going to be a primary contact identified and an authorized signatory, authorized signer. They can be the same person. They do not have to be. There is no stipulation on who your primary contact is other than you want it to be someone who actively monitors their email, and it will be easy for us to reach out to if there are issues. And when you are either, if you're approved, the authorized signer has to be someone that is listed as an officer on your statement of information. And we'll talk about that more later. But this person here does not have to be your authorized signer. You want this to be someone that checks their email regularly. When you go to set up your account, you're going to need to have this information that is listed here. In this portion, these labels and things are part of the GoSmart system. So we didn't design these labels. So for example, the 501c3, it asks for your 501c3 incorporation date, which confuses some people. That's your determination date. When your organization was formed. For many people, that's the same date. Some people, it's different. The other thing that you will need to provide, and this helps with our reporting, is your state assembly it says state house because this covers multiple states, and your state Senate district. If you do not know those things, there is a link here so you can look them up. If your business office is in one place and you're not sure if you should do your venue or your business, you're not evaluated on which one of these districts. Pick the thing that you think best represents your organization. There are those, Beatrice pointed out yesterday that when she answers these questions, she answers for where she lives because that's who she votes for. And that works a lot. Other people go where the business address is. There is no right or wrong. The idea here is we want legislators to understand that the constituents in their districts are being specifically impacted by these programs. For some organizations, you may impact multiple districts. Pick the one you feel is most appropriate. You can use a PO box. For those of you who have one business address and one mailing address, there'll be a separate place to answer that. Okay, let's go on to the next. The applications themselves. The other part, the account part, you can do now. The application is what starts on March 10th. When you go and log back in, because you've already set up your portal, when you go to the application, you're going to see, and make sure you pick correctly either the 501c3 application or the fiscal sponsor application. That information that you filled out in your account is still stored with your application, so you're not going to be asked those details again. You are going to be asked if you have a DBA, you have a mailing address that's different from the business address, what county you are in. Here's where your authorized signer comes in, which, as we talked about, can be the same as your primary contact, does not have to be, and the primary performance venue size. There are some questions. The statute asks some questions that we then obviously have to collect answers for. This is true for both the county and the primary performance venue size. There will be other questions that are asked in the process that are state requirements, and some of them are in the statute. These questions don't impact your eligibility. You just have to answer them in order to be eligible. So whether you have a small performance venue or a large performance venue doesn't help or hurt your eligibility. You just have to answer the question. Okay. Yes.
I have a weird, but folks, the reason some of that is being collected, it actually might be helpful in the future to determine the need for more of these grants and who it's serving and all that. So yeah, don't feel bad about having to put that in. It might be helpful for us in the future.
Yes, and we've tried very hard not to collect anything we don't have to collect, but these are state dollars, and it is important to the state to be able to report out who was helped.
Yeah.
And that is true about geographic, who across the state, what sizes of organizations, and all of those kinds of things. And so that is why some of these, and it is, as Beatrice said, with an eye towards advocacy for continuing the program. Okay, next. All right, as we talked about, the eligibility here is determined by information and documents. And so now we're going to talk about the documents that you're going to provide. The first set of documents is helping establish who you are as an organization. Your 501c3 determination letter, your articles of incorporation, that certification of your status with the Secretary of State we talked about, the 990s, your diversity, your DEI policy, and your harassment policy. This is where you're going to upload all of those documents. For the fiscal sponsors, in the program application, in the program guide itself, it walks you through every step of the application. And there's one set that will walk through 501c3 applications and another section that walks through fiscal sponsors. Because as a fiscal sponsor, you're going to want to pay attention because some questions are going to be specifically about the fiscal sponsor and some are going to be asking for information and documents specifically about the fiscally sponsored. So, as with any application, read and answer the question and just pay attention to who we're talking about. All right, next. So now that we've established your organizational information, now we're going to collect some documents to establish that you are in fact meeting the requirement for production. And so, and this is a lot of threes, and I apologize for that portion. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick 3 productions from 3 different years within the last 5 years. Now, these don't have to be tied to those filed years, to your 990 filed years. This can be anything between 2000 and, not 2000, sorry, 2020 and 2024. You're going to pick 3 productions, 1 from each different year, or 1 each from different years. And then you're going to provide 3 pieces of evidence about that particular production. And the pieces of evidence are going to be selected from this list of 6 different kinds of documents. So for example, in 2021, you did Angels in America. So for that, I've decided that I'm going to provide a box office report, evidence of a paid advertisement, and a review. Then in 2023, I selected our production of The Shot, and I'm going to provide evidence of a paid entertainment, a review, and a copy of the playbill. Then for my 3rd production, I'm going to select Helvetica that we did in 2024 and provide a box office report, social media posts, and email campaign posts. All of these documents are going to be set up as PDFs, and you're going to upload them. This is something, this and the other documents, you can be preparing all of this now so that you do it, you collect it, you make your PDFs, you make sure they're clear and beautiful, that they're under 10 megabytes, and then they're sitting on your computer waiting to be uploaded on the application day. You do not have to collect this and do this all on when you sit down to complete your application. You can, this is an example only. These are not the specific ones you have to do. You just have to pick 3 from our list of 6 here. There is not a specific look that we're requiring for a box office report. We need you to provide something that we can tell is a box office report. I will say about all of these documents and the other documents, you're providing them as PDFs. If there is something weird about your example, about your document that you're providing, put in a note and explain. If you think, oh, you know, when somebody looks at this, they might not quite understand X, Y, or Z, put in a note along with your PDF and explain that. All right, next. Okay. Just a second. I think before we go on to the income section, we'll stop here again for a moment for questions. Beatrice? You're muted, honey.
I think we're all caught up on questions. The spreadsheets will be available, right, for people to work on beforehand and then upload on the 10th?
Yes, yes. We're going to go through now a variety of spreadsheets that you are going to fill out for both the income and also for the 4 different quarters of payroll. These are not currently in the guide because we're finalizing them, making sure that they're all correct and respond correctly and are labeled correctly. Those should be available by the end of this week, and we will have them available on the website, in the portal, and also everyone will be sent a copy. So yes, you are very much encouraged to download these beforehand, fill them out, and then have them ready to upload. So that way you have time, if you have questions as you're filling them out, to do them. You do not have to wait until October 10th to fill in all of this stuff. Okay, so the income section that we were talking about, you're going to have a spreadsheet to download. and you're going to enter the information for 3 years. That is the 3 years that you submit your filed financials for. So those 990s or CTTRs, in the case of fiscal sponsors, the fiscally sponsored organization, you're going to submit financial statements from them, not the fiscal sponsors 990s, but you're going to go to those 3 years and you're going to come to this chart that's got 3 lines on it. And you're going to put the first year, you're going to put 2023, and you're going to enter your total revenue from that year in one box. And then if you have revenue that fall into those 3 special categories, you're going to enter those in. If not, you're going to put in a nice 0. Then the form will calculate, and then you're going to do that for the next year and the next year. The form will then do the calculations and tell you what your adjusted gross revenue is, which tells you your tier for your reimbursements. Okay, so that's the income one. Next. And I know these slides are a little dense. So now we go to our payroll expenses. There are 4 different spreadsheets, 1 per quarter. The first 2 are actual expenses from your quarters that have already happened, Q3 of 2024 and Q4 of 2024. The 3rd and 4th are projections for Q1 of 2025 and Q2 of 2025. We're going to talk about the projections in a minute. Let's start with the actuals. So again, we will have a spreadsheet ahead for you. You can download it, and you will fill out, very importantly, this is by employee. Because the reimbursement is capped at $10,000 per employee, we have to break it down per employee for all of these expenses. You cannot lump them all into one. So you're going to enter an employee name. Then you're going to enter their hourly wage. Even if your employee is paid different rates for different work, you're going to enter here the lowest wage you pay this person. The hourly wage is not part of what will be calculated. The hourly wage is simply to answer the question, because one of the requirements is that you pay everyone at least minimum wage. So this is don't worry that when I put this in, it's not going to add directly up to the gross wages, because we're not going to ask you for the hours. There's all kinds of variables. So don't be concerned about that. Just look at what you paid Susie in the quarter, and maybe I paid her 3 different rates for doing 3 different sets of work. That's fine. One time I paid her $20, one time I paid her $25, and another work we pay her at $30 an hour. You're going to enter $20 an hour on her rate. So that is the lowest rate that establishes that you are above minimum wage. Okay. In the next column, you're going to enter the gross wages that you paid that employee for the quarter. Remembering, these are only W-2 employees, not independent contractors. So there's the gross wages. Then you're going to come to your employer expenses. What did you spend per employee on health and welfare related? So health insurance, retirement plans, those kinds of things. And that needs to be broken down per employee. Then payroll processing expenses. Again, broken down per employee, and the same for workers' comp. I understand some of the payroll expenses and certainly workers' comp, your invoicing doesn't necessarily break it down on a per employee basis. It will if you're paying through a paymaster and they're charging you a flat 5%. This will be easy for you. If you do your payroll in a different way and you are paying a premium for the year to a workers' comp insurance company, then you're going to need to do some calculations. You're going to say, this is how much I paid for the year. break that down by quarters, then break that down by the number of employees you have. And what you'll want to do is provide your documentation and then an explanation of how you calculated that. Then the last thing that you're going to fill out is the taxes withheld, because one of the things that is not reimbursable is the expenses paid by the employer for unemployment insurance. So I'm not talking about SDI. I'm talking about the payroll expenses that are the payroll taxes that are withheld for on both a federal and state level from your employees' gross wages. That is not reimbursable, and that has to be taken out here. So the form will do that for you. It's just going to ask you to enter if Susie was paid gross wages in the quarter of $10,000, what were her gross taxes withheld for the quarter? And then it will calculate what your reimbursable portion is. Now this is capped at $10,000. So if you're paying Susie $20,000 for the quarter, and then you have these other expenses, but the total amount would be over 10,000, you are still capped at 10,000, and then the reimbursement tier of that 10,000. So you're going to do 2 spreadsheets like this on your actual expenses. Next. Now we're going to go to projected expenses. And this is a little more complicated. The way that the grant is structured is we're going to take the amounts that you submit for all 4 quarters, and that's going to establish the maximum amount of your grant. Then when you actually have, if you're approved and you actually get to the end of Q1 and Q2 of 2025 and submit your expenses, then the amount you will be reimbursed for will be your actual expenses, provided they don't exceed your projections. If they come under your projections or are equal to your projections, then they will be used. If you projected that you were going to spend $10,000 on Susie and you actually paid her $20,000, you are still capped at the $10,000 you said you were going to do for Susie, and also what you said you were going to do for all of your employees. If you thought you were going to have 35 people in a show and you ended up doing a show that only had 3 people, your reimbursements will only be based on those 3 people, not the 35. The reason that we are doing these projections, because I realize this is a little complicated, is we believe that we do not have enough funds to actually fill everyone's needs. We have $12.5 million. And when approving the grants, we want to be able to say to people, this is how much money you have for the year. We don't want, it is not for the weak need, Benita. You are right. There's a reason you're here and learning. We don't want to be in that position. So by getting projections and having a set amount, we know how many grants we can grant. And what we will do as we are approving and reviewing, there will be a set that are approved, and then we will continue to review applications and approve more to go onto a wait list. And you will be told up front if you're in the approved group or if you're in the wait list group. And again, first come, first serve. There are 2 reasons really for doing this wait list. Number 1, because these are projections, it's almost inevitable that there are going to be people where their expenses are less than they thought they were. We all know production changes. And so if there are funds left, then we will go to the wait list and people will be moved in to receive funding. The other thing that collecting more applications does for us is it helps us again in advocating to the state for more funds. So we'll talk about that more later, but this is important to remember. You want to carefully think about your projected expenses. You want to make sure you are covering the amount you think you will actually spend. You do not, however, want to grossly overestimate. Number one, it's not going to do you any good because you're only going to get reimbursed for the actual expenses anyway. And what it will do is tie up money. So if you estimate that you're going to spend twice as much as you really are, then what that does is it's going to mean somebody else doesn't get a grant because those dollars are tied up. You're not going to get them, but we can't allot them to someone else. So we do ask that you please try to be as accurate as possible, but don't just wildly overestimate on your projections. Okay, next. All right. Because we live in the real world, you're going to give us your numbers, and then you're also going to have to provide documentation to back up those numbers. The things that are listed here are possibilities. It's not that you have to list everything under each one of these. The documentation is one of the areas where we can be least precise at this point as to what you can provide. Part of the reason is trying to help you, because what is different people have different backup for workers' comp. Different people, whether they are going through a payroll service or a pay master, have different documentation. So we don't want to have a hard, fast list that everyone has to adhere to because some people won't necessarily have those documentations. So this area, there's a little bit more speculation than we would like, but it's because we're trying not to be so limiting that it creates difficulty for people. But basically, you need to prove and back up the monies that you say you should be reimbursed for. So for your wages, and this has to be able to be shown on a per employee basis. So for your wages, we're talking your quarterly state tax filing that lists all of your employees and their withholding, or it could be a payroll register for the quarter from your payroll service or your paymaster. Invoices for the other payments. For something like workers' comp that is not going to probably be broken down per name, you're going to provide that, and then you're going to provide a PDF. You provide in the PDF a document that talks about how you came to the calculations that you used on a per employee basis. This documentation for Q3 and Q4 will be asked for as part of your application. And then Q1 and Q2 will be done as a follow-up report after those quarters. Okay.
So,
breath and more questions.
Terry, there's a lot of concern. We need to, I think, remind folks, this law was actually passed as a way to help companies in California, performing arts companies, comply, meet the burden of complying with the law that was passed, that was known colloquially and historically as AB 5. Which requires, in most cases, that all artists in California be paid as employees, performing arts. All right. There's very few exemptions for that. We can't give you legal advice, but the truth is that if you're paying your artists mostly as independent contractors, you may not be complying with California law. And in order to be eligible for this grant, you have to be complying with California labor laws. Please speak to a labor attorney about that. We can't help you with that, but that was the whole purpose for this statute. So if you are still paying most of your artists, performing artists, as independent contractors, you are most likely not eligible for this grant. I don't know if you have anything to add, Terry.
No, I think what you need to remember is these funds are earmarked specifically as workforce development. They're not to help with independent contractors. These are only funds that the state has designated for employees. And as Beatrice said, you do have to be in compliance. And that is part of the point of the statute, is to help you get in compliance by providing funding. But yes, and we are aware that these are laws that not everybody is in compliance with. But if you are not, then this is an opportunity you're not going to be eligible for. Are there any other questions, Beatrice, that you want to?
No. Most of the discussion seems to be around folks who aren't clear if they're eligible because they're paying only administrators as employees and artists as independent contractors. If you still have a question about that, I think that you are going to need to submit it via email because it's beyond the scope of what I can address here. And if there's a specific reason why you think that you are eligible or have been told that you are eligible, then please submit it via email so we can take a closer look.
Yeah. And the thing to remember is, even if you are in a situation where you are legally paying performers as independent contractors, you're still not eligible to get this funding for them because none of this funding can be reimbursed for someone who you are paying as an independent contractor. Yeah.
So I'm getting a question specifically. Musicians performing single concerts in our venue and negotiating their contracts are not required to be hired as employees. It may be that you just I'm not sure what the primary purpose of your organization is, but if it's not actually producing, that also may go to eligibility. So I think you need to submit via email.
You're correct. There are some exceptions for musicians. And that's my point. Even if the exception for musicians you are meeting legally, that may not eliminate your organization as a whole, but that still, those musician payments are still not eligible for reimbursement. So there's really two separate things. One, and one of the resources that you can go to for learning more about AB5 and your compliance with it is there are some resources on the Californians for the Arts page. We did some great webinars back when the law first passed. So there's really, but remember, there are two different factors. There's one, can you certify that you are in legal compliance? Because you are absolutely right. There are situations in which you can hire a musician for a single performance and have that be a legitimate independent contractor expense. So that might not eliminate you from eligibility for the whole program. But even if you are legitimately paying that musician as an independent contractor, you still, through this program, cannot be reimbursed for those funds for that musician.
Right, but you could be reimbursed for the designer fees, the crew, the admin, the others around that.
Yes. And let's refrain from putting a lot of extra information, answers, as well as questions into the chat. Let's keep all the information that we're sharing, other than links and things, in the Q&A. But yes, those are two separate things. Beatrice, are there any other questions that you want to go over before we kind of go into the home stretch?
No, I think that we are caught up.
Okay. So next, Amanda. As we talked about a couple of times, there are questions that you're going to be asked that you must answer, but the answers will not impact your eligibility. So next. One of the final things that you'll be asked to do is to complete a certificate of compliance. This will be available beforehand. There is one for 501c3s and one for fiscal sponsors that both the fiscal sponsor and somebody from the fiscally sponsored organization will sign off on. There's a number of statements that you will initial as correct and then sign. Among other things, this is where you will certify that you're in compliance with the sexual harassment. You will also certify that you're in compliance with labor laws in California. So this is something else that you can download beforehand and prepare. And this should be signed by your authorized signer, not your primary contact. Next. Okay, and then you will be to the end. You will get an email confirmation that you have submitted. If you do not get an email confirmation, log back into your portal because it will show you whether or not you have submitted. If you're showing up as submitted, but you have not gotten an email confirmation, then email the PAEPF to ask to have that be checked on. You will eventually get a communication that either you have been denied or you've been funded with information about that. Please, please, please watch the email that is provided as the primary contact. The last thing you want is to sit around for 3 weeks because somebody hasn't checked their email. Next. Resources. The program guide has a lot of resources in it. Review the guidelines. Treat that, it goes through every question. Treat that like your study guide from class. Go through, fill out, download the applications, the spreadsheets and forms when they're available at the end of the week. Ask your questions as you're doing it. Maybe attend a second webinar, go back and watch a recording, email for questions. There's also the ability to set up for office hours. One of the things that I will say, I always recommend when you are asking questions, it is much better to ask those by email than verbally, because in a verbal conversation, it is much easier for there to be confusion and details forgotten. One of the great things about getting an email with instructions in it is that you then have that to refer back to as you're doing your calculations, as you're filling in the application. You don't have to worry about, did you take accurate notes? You have a record there. Go set up your portal, watch the tech tips, make sure your authorized signer is on your statement of information. Do all of those things that you can beforehand so you're not doing that in a panic the day of. Next. Once again, there's a link here to the tech tips that has tutorials and all that kind of stuff, which is very handy, and I would recommend going and visiting it before you set up your application portal and before you complete the application. Next. This is the sheet we talked about that gives you instructions on going and looking yourself up on the Secretary of State website. You can both download your certificate of your status here, and also you can check your statement of information, make sure it's accurate, and make sure that you're confirming that your authorized signatory is listed as an officer. There's also a listing on this as the agent. Agent cannot be your authorized signer if the person is listed only as an agent. That's someone who can accept service for you. So make sure when you're confirming your authorized signer that you confirm that they are listed as an officer on your statement of information. Next. Use a valid email address. Use an email address that is checked regularly, and if you're not getting messages, check your spam. Next. Call us, ask for help, use us, email. That is what we are here for. Next. I would be remiss to not once again remind you that Californians for the Arts and Californians Arts Advocates are service organizations that are here, and we are dependent upon membership in order to be able to provide the free programs that we do. So we would love it if you would consider membership. Next. In terms of advocacy, we have 2 events coming up in April in Sacramento. The first is our annual summit, which is a great networking, educating experience that is a paid day-long conference. And on April 23rd, which is all free, we have Arts Advocacy Day. We have 200 to 300 advocates that gather in the Capitol, and we have a fun rally in the morning, and then everyone goes off for meetings with their state legislators. And this is an incredibly impactful, the pictures that we shared earlier were from a couple of years ago when we were all there with our Fund 1116 signs to go and meet with our legislators and make the case directly. This is incredibly impactful because it demonstrates to the legislators how these bills and how the asking for these funds, for California Arts Council funds, directly impacts the constituents in their direct constituents in their districts. So that's my pitch there, and that's where you can get information and register. Next. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your help in making this program possible. And thank you so much. We really do hope that you will help us spread the word about the program. So at the end of the day, we can make sure that everyone who is eligible has the information and is applying, both to help them and to help you, so that we have the possibility for additional funds. I will tell you, the grant relief funds that were done during COVID that were great and wonderful, almost everyone, well, not all of those programs ended up being undersubscribed. So the money that was allotted was not all used. And unfortunately, what that has created in the minds of legislators is the belief that we ask for more money than we need, and that the need is not that great. We need this program to be fully subscribed and oversubscribed. And everyone that applies helps us make that case. So on that, Beatrice, are there any final questions?
Sorry, no, we are all caught up.
Excellent. This
It
has
was
been
a
a great
lively question session, and we have lots and lots to, I think, respond to and follow up with.
That's great. And congratulations, all of you, for pushing our limits. We appreciate that. And questions that you ask really do help not just you, but everyone else, because this is a brand new program. And we're figuring some of this out legally with the state as we go. There's, as I said before, there's the intention for when the legislation is written. There is the way the words actually go down, and then there's interpretation, which, as I said, all happens in actual practice. We appreciate you all being here. We hope that the information was helpful. We will continue to correspond with you because you have registered. Any updates or changes, we will send along. We will, as I said, there will be a follow-up email today with the or probably tonight, let's be honest, with the assets from today. And then once we have those other forms finalized, we will send those out to all of you as well. All right. Beatrice, any final thoughts?
I just want to redirect everybody to that handy dandy links document. It has the links to the guidelines. It has the links to all sorts of California, IRS, all sorts of different sites. It's really helpful. So take a minute to copy that, to save the chat if you need to, so that you can have that and go back and look, and we'll be updating all sorts of things as we get more information.
Martha, any final thoughts?
No, it's been a great webinar, you guys. Thank you.
Okay. Then on that, we are going to end an exciting 6 minutes early and give you all back the most valuable resource you can get, 6 minutes of your time. Thank you all.